We all know about serial killers, their heinous crimes against humanity, their brutality, and the evil nature concerning their crimes and how they murdered innocent people in cold blood. Did these people act completely on their own? Or were they influenced by something sinister that is ignored and simply labeled mental illness or insanity, and sometimes completely left out of the picture as to why these people did the things they did, and why some still continue to do these sinister acts today? How can a normal human being take the lives of others in such brutal acts and behave as if it was a normal, everyday activity? Let us start with the origins of demons and unclean spirits and where they came from. Demons are the disembodied spirits of the Gaborum. The Gaborum are the mighty men of renown, created by the Watchers, or the sons of God, when they left their heavenly abode and came to the daughters of men and produced the mighty men of renown, as recorded in Genesis chapter 6. Many ignorant people simply refuse what is very clear in the Bible and write these passages off as offspring of normal men. This is easily refuted in the scriptures. These mighty men were half-breeds, angelic hybrids. The union of the Watchers with humans produced children that were different in many ways. The first apparent difference was that they developed giantism. These are the wicked giants that are mentioned throughout the Bible. For example, Og, the king of Bashan, whose bed was 13 to 15 feet long, and Goliath, who was 6 cubits tall, or about 9 feet. Many of these men had 6 fingers and toes. In addition to giantism, the Gaborum had powerful psychic abilities, massive physical strength, and extreme intelligence. They were astrologers, homosexuals, cannibals, killers, blood drinkers, and eaters of raw flesh. They had super powerful minds and were extremely intelligent. They possessed all the knowledge of sciences, as we can clearly see in the remains of these ancient cities and megalithic structures across the world that simply cannot be remade or rebuilt to this day. They use these powers to control and enslave mankind. These are the ones that built the Great Pyramids and all the megalithic wonders around the pre-flood world. These mighty men and the wicked creations produced by the Watchers were all wiped out in the flood. These beings, dead in the flesh now, walk among us in spirit, as the Bible says in Matthew 12:43. When the unclean spirit is gone out of a man, he walketh through dry places, seeking rest, and findeth none. These spirits roam the earth. Demons do not come from hell as mainstream movies depict, and most people believe due to improper teachings of men. These beings fear hell themselves, as we can read in Luke 8:31. And they besought him that he would not command them to go into the deep. In this verse, it's very clear that these demons, referred to in the scripture as legion, feared Jesus and begged not to be cast into the deep. Instead, they begged that Jesus cast them into a herd of swine. This should be a very good example of just how bad the deep, or hell, is, as even the demons themselves have an extreme fear of it. The demons know that once you are cast into the deep, there is no escape, and there are no ways out. It is an eternal place of punishment. The proper term for demon is this. In ancient Greek belief, a demon is considered a divinity or supernatural being of a nature between gods and humans. Most people are not aware that the term demon is the Greek derivative for the modern term demon. In this sense, the term demon means replete with knowledge. These entities have existed for many thousands of years. They are experts in knowledge in human psychology. Some of these spirits vary from one to the other in terms of what they were when they walked the earth in the pre-flood days. Some of these spirits were giants, or the men of renown. They were cannibals, blood drinkers, homosexuals, and creatures of extreme violence. The Bible makes it clear that not all demons are the same. Some are more wicked than others. Some are stronger than others, and they can serve completely different functions. Some demons are stronger than others, as we can clearly see in Mark 9:29, where Jesus told his disciples that they weren't able to cast out that particular kind of demon because they lacked faith. He went on to tell them that this kind of demon only comes out after prayer and fasting, in which builds your faith. Ephesians 6:12 also speaks clearly of the different ranks of demons in Satan's army. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood. This is very clear. Not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. There are different types of demons that serve different functions, such as in Mark 9:25, the spirit was called a deaf and dumb spirit, whereas other spirits can cause fear and depression, such as in 1 Samuel 16, verse 14, where Saul was tormented by an evil spirit God sent upon him. As we read in 1 Samuel 16:14 through 15, but the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. And Saul's servants said unto him, Behold now, an evil spirit from God troubleth thee. Now some may ask, why did God let an evil spirit torment Saul? And in what way was the evil spirit from the Lord? Firstly, the evil spirit was from the Lord, in that it was allowed by God to harass Saul. Ultimately, all created things are under God's control. This evil spirit was part of God's judgment upon Saul for his disobedience. Saul had directly disobeyed God on 2 occasions, as you can read in these following verses. Therefore God removed his spirit from Saul and allowed an evil spirit to torment him. Satan and the demons had always wanted to attack Saul. God was now simply giving them permission to do so. In Mark 9, we read that some spirits are stronger than others. Mark 9:25. As we read, when Jesus saw that people came running together, he rebuked the foul spirit, saying unto him, Thou deaf and dumb spirit, I charge thee, come out of him, and enter no more into him. Some evil spirits are even more wicked than others, as we can see in Matthew 12, verses 43 through 45. When the unclean spirit is gone out of a man, he walketh through dry places, seeking rest, and findeth none. Then goeth he, and taketh with himself 7 other spirits more wicked than himself, and they enter in and dwell there. And the last state of that man is worse than the first. Even so shall it be unto this wicked generation. That last part there is very key. Now, let us look at the behavior of some well-known serial killers. If we compare some traits of the Geborim with what was going on in the pre-flood times, we will see a pattern in the behavior and traits of serial killers, the main parts being cannibalism, consumption of blood, homosexuality, bestiality or pansexualism, occult practices, killing for sport or pleasure, drug use, including alcoholism, high intelligence, apathy, and misanthropy.
On the night of July 22nd, 1991, Milwaukee police finally discovered the horrendous secrets that Jeffrey Dahmer had been desperately hiding for many years. Acting on a tip from a young gay man who escaped from Dahmer's apartment, police searched number 213 and found a chamber of unimaginable horrors. Human heads and a heart wrapped and bagged in the freezer. Hands and feet at the bottom of his soup kettle. Skulls tucked away in a file cabinet. And this blue barrel stuffed with dismembered torsos soaking in acid. Dahmer would spend the next 24 hours confessing, telling in vivid detail of a murder spree that began in 1978 when he was 18 and ended with 17 young men dead.
I had this reoccurring fantasy of meeting a hitchhiker on the road and of taking him hostage and doing what I wanted. And I never in my wildest nightmares thought that it would become a reality.
Why would Dahmer have, as he put it, created his own Holocaust? How did he become so filled with evil? It would be comforting to point to an abusive childhood, an early life filled with hatred or horror, but his was filled with love.
Jeff was the most beautiful, darling, sweetest baby, the nicest young boy.
There just were no real signs when he was growing up.
Imagine your child grows up to be a murderer. Would you still love him? Would the guilt and sense of responsibility be overwhelming? Jeffrey Dahmer's parents have struggled mightily to understand what might have gone wrong with their child. His father's search for an explanation led him to look inward, even to write a book simply titled A Father's Story. But his search may be in vain, because even the experts and profilers who studied serial killers are baffled by why they do it.
There doesn't seem to be any indication in any of the serial murderers that something external makes them want to kill. It's as if something is thrown, a switch is thrown, and they begin on the pattern of what their pattern will be.
Maybe all we can do is what Lionel Dahmer did. Look back and try to see what went wrong. As a young child at the beach with his parents, Jeffrey Dahmer discovered a dead crab. He examined it with a child's curiosity, but later the curiosity grew into something unthinkable.
All I know is that I wanted to see what the insides of these animals looked like. There may have been some violence involved, some underlying subconscious feelings of violence. It was a compulsion. It became a compulsion.
Jeffrey Dahmer got bigger, and so did his compulsion to look at the insides of living things. He began to kill them, satisfying powerful urges that he didn't understand.
In 9th grade, in biology class, we had the usual dissection of fetal pigs, and I took the remains of that home and kept the skeleton of it, and I just started branching out. Dogs, cats. I suppose it could have turned into a normal hobby like taxidermy, but it didn't. It veered off into this.
More and more, Dahmer killed animals in the woods behind his house. He knew it was wrong, but he couldn't stop. Then, at 14 or 15, it got worse.
I don't know, it became a compulsion, and it switched from animals to humans. I still don't understand it. I don't know why.
If your fantasy life as a teenager includes killing, who do you tell?
From about 15 years on up, a great deal of my thoughts were basically unshareable with anyone. So I just closed myself off and just put on a mask of normalcy
As Jeffrey Dahmer entered adolescence, his secrets multiplied. He began to feel attracted to other young men. It was not an issue he could talk to his father about, but Jeffrey knew he was gay.
Started having obsessive thoughts of violence intermingled with sex. And it just got worse and worse. I didn't know how to tell anyone about it, so I didn't.
And just as Jeffrey was becoming aware of his internal violent sexual urges, his external life began to unravel. His parents' marriage, which had been rocky throughout his childhood, finally ended. He found himself alone more and more. And then one night, while his mother was away on a trip and his father newly moved into a motel down the street, a fantasy Jeffrey had been having for years came true, and the killing began.
I was 18 years old, driving home. I saw this hitchhiker about a mile from my house, and he caught my eye. I drove past him, thought to myself, should I stop, pick him up, or should I just keep on going? I wish I just kept on going, but I didn't. Turned around, picked him up, and that's when the nightmare became a reality. It just seemed so bizarre to me that this obsession that I had been thinking about and wanting, just all the parts are there, and they make it possible to make it happen. Just at the time when it could happen, when there's nobody at the house for 2 weeks.
Unlike other serial killers who seem to actually derive satisfaction from the killing, Jeffrey Dahmer says he did not. His motivation, his objective was sexual. He wanted to create a sexual slave that he could totally control. And to that end, he performed the most horrific of experiments on his victims, literally drilling holes in their head.
I tried to create living zombies with muriatic acid in the drill, but it never worked. No, the killing wasn't the objective. I just wanted to have the person under my complete control to do with as I wanted.
Dr. Helen Morrison, who profiles these men, says part of the reason is because serial killers like Dahmer literally feel things differently than a normal person.
To the serial murderer, it's very similar to the young child who may pull the legs off of a daddy long legs or a fly to see what happens. There is no humanity there. It's just, oh, this is a very interesting thing. They do things to individuals that they've never experienced themselves. They want to see pain, or they want to see fear, or they want to see agony.
And with Dahmer, that experimenting included what had to be the most shocking part of this case. He sometimes ate his victims.
It made me feel like they were a permanent part of me. Besides the just mere curiosity of what it would be like, it made them feel that they were a part of me, and it gave me a sexual satisfaction.
We can clearly see that Jeff was possessed by very powerful demonic spirits that slowly enticed him into darker and more wicked acts as his life progressed. He fits into nearly every category of the behavior of the Gaborim. These demons fulfill their lusts and wicked activities through their human host that they possess. Dahmer is an example of these more powerful and extremely wicked demons that used him to facilitate their wickedness through their host. We see these doctors yammer on and on, trying to figure out the whys and hows a person could be this way and why they would behave in such a violent, wicked manner. The answer is simple and very easy to understand when you plug in the spiritual aspect, which is completely ignored by these doctors due to their severe ignorance of the scriptures and the spiritual nature behind these acts. This is the hand-drawn picture of an altar that Dahmer was designing and in the process of creating in his bedroom, which was found in his apartment by the police. This is a very interesting thing to take note of. Now, why would Jeff want to create an altar such as this? It is simple to understand. This altar would have served as a shrine to the demons that possessed him. This altar is very similar to other occult altars, as we will see in the following images. In this picture, we see several Aztec altars. Note the two pillars of men on this one, and on this other one with the skulls. Same as what Jeff was drawing up for his altar. In the next picture here, we see the Freemason altar. Again, very similar. Also note that Jeff even wrote black and white carpet on his drawing, same as the Freemasons' black and white tiles around their altars. We even see similar designs of these altars in the Catholic churches. When Jeffrey went to prison, he met with Pastor Roy Ratcliffe. Roy was amazed at the excitement Jeff showed when he was wanting to learn about the Bible. Jeff was also baptized in prison. I firmly believe this is what Jeff had been searching for his entire life, and it was at this moment in prison that he found it, and that was Jesus Christ. Jeff found release of his tormentors, of these foul, unclean spirits, through the power of God's Word and the saving power of Jesus Christ. Many people were shocked and even dismayed at this event, to which I say to those people, shame on you. This is a perfect example of how God's forgiveness works. No matter how horrid of a sinner you are, how wicked you live, you could still be redeemed by the power of Jesus Christ. It is not surprising that shortly after Jeff was saved and baptized that he was killed by a fellow inmate. I firmly believe this was God's way of ending his pain and taking him home. There is also something else we need to take note of before we continue, and that is the issue of the state where Dahmer and Ed Gein lived, that state being Wisconsin, which is home to many Nephilim mounds. I find a strong connection to these mounds and the extreme cases of serial killers. Wisconsin has had 4 major serial killers, being that Jeff Dahmer, Ed Gein, David Spanbauer, and Walter Ellis. In the case of Ed Gein, there is a small mound group on the southern shore of Plainfield Lake near the small community of Plainfield, just off Interstate 39 south of Stevens Point, where Ed Gein lived.
The novel and film Psycho stem from a true story. Author Robert Bloch lived not far from the rural Wisconsin crime scene. In his novel, timid Norman Bates has murdered his mother, keeping the corpse around for company. A generation later, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre wove another version of the tale.
What happened was true. The most bizarre and brutal series of crimes in America.
The family of unemployed butchers lures travelers into their den of horror, an isolated farmhouse filled with the remnants of past visitors. One of the lunatics, Leatherface, wears a mask made of human skin and prefers women's clothes.
The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. After you stop screaming.
The truth is not only stranger than fiction, it is more appalling. The inspiration of these movie madmen was not young and handsome, nor a squealing giant, but a timid little farmer. Edward Gein had lived most of his life in a farmhouse with his mother and his brother Henry outside of Plainfield, Wisconsin. His father died when Ed was a child. Bible-pounding Mother Gein always warned her sons that all women were sinful. Just stay on the farm. Ed considered her a saint. As an adult, Ed's brother Henry started to disagree with this view of Mother. He told the now-grown Ed that he was too attached to their mother, a mama's boy. Henry Gein died shortly after that during a forest fire. Ed was the last person to see him alive. Mother Gein died after a series of strokes in 1945. Ed sealed off her bedroom and the parlor as a weird shrine, living only in his kitchen and his bedroom, immersing himself in books about anatomy, Nazi atrocities, South Sea Island cannibals, and true crime stories. A government subsidy meant he no longer had to tend the farm. Occasionally, he hired himself out to his neighbors. Some of Plainfield's 700 other residents called him Weird Ed. He would give them a funny smile at odd times, but nobody paid much attention to the harmless 5'5" farmer. According to Ed, he convinced another local farmhand named Gus to help him with some work. That work was grave robbing. Old Gus and Ed dug up the bodies of women and carried them back to Ed's farmhouse. Ed told his friend only that he was doing experiments. Few people ever entered this lonely farmhouse. Brave boys would try to peer into the house because Ed said he kept shrunken heads in there. Ed always chased trespassers off his land. The house became unimaginably filthy with layer upon layer of waste, slop, and unidentifiable clutter. Cheap pictures of Jesus on one wall and a mask of human skin on another. Comic books and volumes on embalming, children's toys, and human bones. One night in 1954, Ed walked into a saloon in nearby Pine Grove, deserted except for the owner, Mary Hogan, who physically resembled Ed's mother, but whose body attitude reflected Ed's image of a scarlet woman. Ed shot her with a .22, packed the 51-year-old woman onto a sled, and carted her back home. Ed continued his lonely life, unmolested by outsiders or sanity. Occasionally, local families would ask him to babysit. He was always there to help out. In November 1957, Ed hung around Warden's hardware store in Plainfield. Beatrice Warden was a buxom woman whose shape reminded Ed of his mother. Mrs. Warden's son, Frank, was deputy sheriff and unofficial fire chief. Eddie mentioned in passing that he'd have to buy antifreeze for his truck. On the first day of hunting season, Plainfield's men were out chasing deer. When Frank Warden came back to his mother's store, he found her cash register missing. So was his mother. There was a blood stain on the floor and a receipt for antifreeze. The death of Beatrice Warden appeared to be utterly senseless murder. The sheriff drove out to the Gein farm, finding the shed unlocked. Hanging from the rafters, upside down, was the headless body of Beatrice Warden, slit open like a butchered animal. Gein quietly went into custody, and the full horror of his house came to light. Investigators prowled through the rooms of the filthy Gein home. On the stove was a fresh human heart in a pot, ready to be cooked and eaten. The tops of skulls were hollowed out, used for drinking bowls like the ancient Vikings. Human organs were kept in the icebox. Furniture had been reupholstered with human skin. In a box were Ed Gein's collection of female sex organs, cut from the corpses he had dug up. There were 9 face masks peeled from the heads of the dead. One was identified as Mary Hogan. Vests and leggings sewn together from the skin of cadavers were found. As near as anyone could reckon, there were a total of 15 bodies. In custody, Ed Gein quietly admitted to his ghoulish habits. He only vaguely remembered killing Beatrice Warden, Mary Hogan, and indignantly resented the implication that he had stolen Warden's cash register. He merely wanted to see how it worked. Plainfield suddenly became infamous. Reporters, scavengers, and tourists flocked to the town that boasted a real-life ghoul, a man who dug up corpses, ate their organs, and dressed in handmade vests of human skin under the light of the moon. One entrepreneur bought Gein's truck and exhibited it throughout the Midwest for morbid curiosity seekers. Another man planned to turn the Gein farm into a permanent museum of horrors, charging admission for the privilege of being revolted. The farmhouse mysteriously caught fire. Local authorities took their time to get to the scene. That wasn't a surprise. The fire chief was Deputy Sheriff Frank Warden, who had seen his mother's body hanging like a gutted deer in Ed Gein's farmhouse. Ed Gein was put under observation at the Wisconsin State Hospital for the Criminally Insane. Over the years, psychiatrists questioned Gein like a prized trophy. One test had the patient explain familiar sayings. When the doctor said, "A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush," Ed Gein chuckled and said, "If you have a bird in your hand and you squeeze it too hard, you might kill it." The doctors decided Eddie wasn't quite ready for the outside world. He died of old age in 1984. The nurses all agreed that he seemed like a nice, harmless little man.
Again, we can clearly see the same traits the Gaborim exhibited through the acts of Ed Gein. We can also look at the way Ed and his brother were raised by his mother Augusta and her extreme inaccurate biblical teachings that were clearly the doctrines of demons. It would seem very clear that Augusta herself was influenced by demons, teaching her sons about the innate immorality of the world and the belief that all women were naturally prostitutes and instruments of the devil. She reserved time every afternoon to read to them from the Bible, usually selecting graphic verses from the Old Testament concerning death, murder, and divine retribution. His mother punished Ed whenever he tried to make friends and kept him away from social activities. Ed Gein was devoted to pleasing his domineering mother. Augusta was rarely pleased with her sons, believing that they were destined to become failures and alcoholics like their father. After Ed's brother died from heart failure, which it was suspected that Ed may have killed his brother out of jealousy, it was then just Ed and his mother. After the death of his mother due to a stroke, Ed was devastated, and this is the point where he started his extreme downward spiral and then began digging up corpses that would resemble his mother. His sick obsession of using human remains to create morbid items such as furniture, lampshades, soup bowls, and finally going as far as to create skin suits out of the female body parts that he dug up, and wearing these skin suits, dancing around in the moonlight, pretending to be a woman, outlines how demons operate to destroy the mind of the host and causes them to behave in an animalistic, inhuman manner, and how these extreme cases, they pollute and sicken the soul into total depravity, numbing the conscience into making the host believe they are behaving in a normal fashion. Ed Gein's solitude and avoidance of people is a clear sign of misanthropy, another trait that is expressed by the Gaborim and their hatred of mankind. Ed also progressed into cannibalism and ate the remains of the bodies he dug up. Ed Gein is another example of possession by extremely powerful Gaborim demons, and once again, modern scientists chalks it up to mental illness and insanity. We are already seeing this type of cannibalistic, transsexual, morbid behavior going mainstream and being slowly pushed into society as normal behavior. With TV shows such as Dexter, the Santa Clarita Diet, and many others that glorify serial killings and the eating of human flesh done as entertainment and satirical humor, as is done in the Santa Clarita Diet, it is far from being humorous. It is a very sick, demented taboo that is now being portrayed as the norm, just as it was considered the norm in the days of Noah. People do not realize it, but by watching these programs, they are being influenced by demonic spirits, and certain ideas are being put into the minds of millions that these types of wicked activities are no longer shocking nor sinful, but appealing and funny. Cannibalism is the physical horror which accompanies the spiritual horror of total apostasy. And we are now seeing this apostasy being revealed right before our very eyes in mainstream society and the entertainment industry. As the spirit of Antichrist continues to grow stronger and stronger, we are seeing how total lawlessness is spreading like wildfire, and just why the Antichrist, when revealed, will be called the man of lawlessness, as these types of behaviors will be completely normal during the reign of the Antichrist and perceived as spiritual freedom and expressions of the evolved humanity. It is of no surprise, and many people may not even be aware of this, but the Talmud itself permits the consumption of human blood and flesh. David Berkowitz is a perfect example of the workings of demons and how they operate through possession of the human host. David Berkowitz was possessed by a powerful demon named Sam. Labeled the .44 caliber killer by the media, Mr. Berkowitz shot people in cold blood with little to no remorse. He wrote many letters to the authorities with various symbols coupled with threatening statements. In his apartment we find other odd and strange writings on the walls, such as this picture. Things that to most people make little to no sense and are written off as just the ramblings of a madman with a serious mental illness. The most interesting part of this whole matter is how the media ran with the story that David was being told to kill by the neighbor's dog, a black lab named Harvey. The truth was that the dog played very little role in the goings-on of David and was nothing more than a simple nuisance due to the relentless barking at night. The truth, as told by Mr. Berkowitz himself to the authorities, is that Sam was not the dog named Harvey that was giving him the orders to kill, but that the entity was named Sam, whom was the demon that was giving him the orders for murder. I find it very interesting that instead of printing the truth about the demon named Sam telling Mr. Berkowitz to kill, they instead covered it up and went with the story of the dog telling him his orders to kill, and is even portrayed in comical fashion in several movies. I will let Mr. Berkowitz speak for himself on this matter.
You know, one other misconception is, of course, the big story about the dog, the talking dog. First of all, as I shared in the article that my mother gave to the Good Housekeeping back in 1978, where my sister also spoke, and I had a lot of, mental health issues. I really was losing my mind. I had become schizophrenic, and I believe that was a result of the demons that were really inside of me and working, and that I opened myself up to. But I had mental health issues all my life, and behavioral issues all my life, including the attention deficit disorder and hyperactivity, which back then as a child, wasn't even recognized. I was just seen as a nuisance and a disciplinary problem, and somebody for teachers to scream at because of things which I couldn't control. I'm sorry, I just couldn't control that stuff. But nevertheless, my mental health began to deteriorate, and at times I was hallucinating, and I did, during some occultic rituals, use LSD as well as drink some wine. So I had some maybe after effects of that, and I used LSD when I was in the Army too. Not to make excuses, but this was at the time some of the things I was dealing with as a young man, just trying to make it in life, and just trying to survive, and just doing things that young men usually do sometimes without thinking, Because of the Satanism, one of the deities that I used to pay homage to was a deity by the name of Samhain, which I used to call Samhain, spelled S-A-M-H-A-I-N, Samhain. He was a druidic deity of druids, which demanded human sacrifice. And because I used to seek communication with this demonic entity, as dumb and crazy as it sounds, I regret this. This was a nightmare, but at the time, that's what I was doing. So I was calling upon this demonic entity, this druid spirit, and it was like he was reaching out to me. In my mind, I felt I was really getting messages from him. I was reading literature from a church called the Process Church of Final Judgment. I was using some of that literature, which was calling on to start anarchy and try to bring in the end of the world so that Jesus could come back. It was a whole mixed up, twisted philosophy, but it was something that was, I believe, demonically energized. The teachings which I was reading from, also the Satanic Bible, and other things I was trying to do at that time of my life of searching and everything, these things became very real. It was hard to distinguish reality from that, and still struggling to make a living and work and pay bills, and even though I was getting further and further behind. When I was arrested, I only had $65 to my name, so I was on a collision course with death. To think what my life would have been if I never came to Christ. I honestly believe that I would not be alive today. I probably would have taken my life, because in my times of depression and darkness, there was really no reason to get up in the morning, no reason to go through the day. It was a lot of pain, a lot of mental and emotional anguish and guilt and torment and all these things that I was carrying. And when I came to the Lord, the Lord began to change all those things. Yeah, okay, that sounds easy. That sounds like just words. People could say, yeah, sure, right. I don't expect people to believe me, but that doesn't matter, because the Lord is still working through me. And so that's really what counts. So I'm the Lord's servant, and I know what Jesus Christ has done with my life, and I'm so thankful for that. I began to read the Bible. I developed a thirst for the Bible. I couldn't put it down. I was reading it every moment. Every time I was back in my cell, back from my work assignment or whatever, I couldn't wait to pick up the Bible. That verse from Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20 comes to mind, that the Lord is able to do exceedingly and abundantly above all I could ever ask or think.